Yes. Well, we could use Facebook for sure, but that's the yeah. Well, we could use Facebook for sure, but could you go on that live stream and that's the this link instead? Because you can post, you can write on it. I remember. Could you that's the until it's thing. Okay. Okay. Well, I have the link. Sorry. Until it's thing. Okay. Well, I have the. Yeah. Guest Wi-Fi. You can use that. What is the Wi-Fi? Oh. It's just the thing. Yeah. Guest Wi-Fi. You can use that. Oh. It's just yeah. Guest Wi-Fi. No need to. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So I have the link right now. I'm just gonna post that. Yeah. Let me show you. So this is it. It's gonna have a 15-second delay. Yeah, but it's here. Anyone can access it. So I'm gonna post this. So this is it. So this is it. I'm gonna post it. Yeah, but it's so at least the sound is working. That's good. So at least the sound is you really need to like write this in my passwords. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay. So the link is on Facebook. You really need to like how do I text it? Because it's like really the link is on email it. I can do. You really need to like yes, just to kind of people can have Facebook. Yes. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Today, and then what's your email? Oh yeah, I do have it. Let me close it all up. Yep. Wonderful. I'm sending from my personal. the sound is fine. You should receive the sound. See if you can type something. See if you can type something. What's done? Oh, you got it. I just wrote something on the. Let me say hi. What's done? Oh, you got it. So far, we have only one person watching. That's I just wrote. So far, we have. That's fine. Most people will probably use anyway. I mean, yeah. Most important thing right now for you is to take notes. Really. Maybe. That's fine. Oh, yeah. No, as in like when you know when they're. It did. Okay. You, all right. What's your email? No, as in like when you. Yeah, because I'm sending you. It did. Okay. You, I should have this. Okay. I sent it to you. All right. So send it to her. Wait. What's your last name? Sorry. No, I sent it to you. Oh. So how do you get? All right. So send it to her. Wait, oh yeah, Facebook. Can you go to Facebook quickly? Oh. So how do you get? Oh, sure. I see. I see. Oh yeah. She doesn't have Facebook. She doesn't activate. Can you go to Facebook quickly? Oh, sure. I see. Okay. Yeah, she doesn't have Facebook. She doesn't activate. Oh yeah. There you go. Boom. We have it right here. That's the link. Oh, sure. Okay. She doesn't have Facebook. She doesn't activate. Oh yeah. There you go. Boom. We have it right here. That's the link. No, just Trump change your link. Oh yeah. There you go. Boom. We have it right here. That's the link. Important. Cap letter. I don't know. Urgent. I guess the name Trump automatically now I read everything that has Trump on it. Important. Cap letter. I don't know. Yep, that's the idea. They'll go check their email. I guess the name Trump automatically now I read everything that has Trump on it. Important. Cap letter. I don't know. Yep, that's the idea. They'll go check their email. I guess the name Trump automatically now I read everything. Elbus is still the one technically sending all the emails. Yep, that's the idea. Oh. I guess the name Trump is taken away by default. I see. Elbus is still the one technically sending all the emails. Yep, that's the idea. Oh. Is taken away by default. I see. Elbus is still the one technically sending all the emails. Oh, yeah. Oh. Is taken away by default. I see. Elbus is still the one technically sending all the emails. View. Watch him remotely. Here's the link. Yes. I honestly don't think. Yes, I can. View. It's not clear, but watch him remotely. Here's the link. Yes. I honestly. Yes, I can. View. It's not clear, but watch him remotely. This will be recorded as a video. I honestly. So once we stop the stream, we have a video that is extra good. So if anything, people will be able to watch it. Okay. Here's the list time we got as a video. I once we stop the stream, so a video. Oh, yeah, that's not very clear. Yeah, it's on. It's working. hungry. It's good. It's live. I want to stand by that. Hungry. It's good. It's live. Hungry. Okay. It's good. It's live. Honestly, no one can see you. Okay. Then it will probably stop because no one can see you. Okay. There's two people watching right now. That's good. Uh-oh. No sounds. Why is there no sound? Good sound. Said no consistent sound. No sound. Why is probably? Good sound. Said no clear and right sound. Aaron, could you do why is probably on the mic? Said no clear and right sound. Aaron, could you do why is probably? It's coming in and out. They say. Coming in and out. That's a problem. I'm really hoping. That's a problem. I'm really. He still didn't hear though. He still didn't hear though.
in the state of Minnesota. So today what our agenda is going to be is Scott's going to give a presentation for around 30 minutes. We're going to have questions and answers. So today what our agenda is going to be is Scott's going to give a presentation for around 30 minutes. We're streaming this live to we're going to have questions and answers on the state of Minnesota and to the Wisconsin Association of International Educators in Wisconsin. So we're going to then kind of set aside for any students who might have some extra questions that won't be taped after we end, and we'll have a question and answer. So if you think that your question might be more intimate than you want to ask in a larger audience, that will be fine. Not only will Scott do it, but Gene Kildow, who's also been working for about 20 years in a larger audience, in the Borene law firm will also be helping. So with that, I just want to say thanks for helping get it together. Kara, Luann, and Bruce in my office helped a lot, and then Ozzy and Emiko with Minnesota International Educators helped a lot. So, Scott.
Thank you very much. Can I quote you on that endorsement? That was fabulous. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. I did want to, Gene, if you would stand up again for a moment. Gene is one of the finest immigration lawyers I've ever had the pleasure to work with, and she and I have been working together for about 20 years now. Prior to that, she was the first immigration lawyer ever hired by Mayo Clinic, who's responsible for all of the they have F and J programs, H is everything. They're one of the, I think they're the largest private employer in the state of Minnesota. She had an undergraduate degree from Berkeley in California. She happens to be fluent in Spanish, if that matters to anyone. She loves to use it. Within our office, she has especially strong skills dealing with undocumented folks, families, based related things, and education-related immigration issues, as well as the employment-related immigration issues. So thank you, Gene. So when we get to, we're going to do the presentation, I'll give some reports in my opinion of kind of where things are at and where they might be headed. And then we'll switch over to a Q&A, and then at that point we will go offline, is that my understanding? And then so it'll be a little more private and won't be all on YouTube or whatever, so we can be a little more direct from both sides and have a conversation with Q&A. There's some advanced questions that I've gotten from Aaron and Huyen, and I'll work those in together with the live questions from the people who are here. After that's done, I guess we have the room until about 2 o'clock. We will stay as long as people have questions, up until I need to get back and leave for another appointment by about 3 o'clock. And if there are questions remaining after that, if anybody who's still sticking around for that, we'll explain how you can get in touch with us, or if you wanted to continue the conversation. We're sorry we wouldn't be able to stay here and answer everybody's question in detail. It's just not humanly possible. Anyway, a thought that occurred to me just driving over here, I was listening the radio. They're playing a lot of Leonard Cohen stuff. Anybody here like Leonard Cohen? Yeah, good. Me too. He has a lot of lines that are both poetic and kind of describe situations that I've been in. And this is a situation that, with immigration law, I've been through. When I started out, there was an Iranian student crisis in the United States because the hostages were taken, and it was the Jimmy Carter administration. Walter Mondale from McAllister was the vice president at the time, and they didn't have any leverage to try to get those American hostages released. And so they said, well, what can we do? What levers are available? We don't have any relations, and nobody's answering the phone over there. Well, we do have this. There are more Iranian students in the United States than in any other country in the world outside of Iran. Why don't we just check in on them? We're not going to harass them, but we're going to make every one of those students check in for their whereabouts. And so they did that here, right in St. Paul, in the old post office building with the immigration office. And those were some of the first people that I had as clients, were Iranian students. Eventually, that all had happy endings for most of them because law changes that eventually happened under the Reagan administration, the legalization program and everything. Bruce Godfrey, formerly of the INS, I've known him as long as I've been an immigration lawyer. He's the only person in this room that has more immigration experience than I do, I think. And he's a good guy, too. And he works at McAllister on Wednesdays, and he's also at the University of Minnesota. He's retired from government service, but he's still doing things to help all of us. But Leonard Cohen, this is a line that came to mind because of the sort of schizophrenic or split nature. You'll make a lot of references to this. Think of a line from let's see, I'll come back to that, but there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So you can look at the glass is half full, the glass is half empty, but this is kind of business as usual for U.S. immigration policy and legislation and discussions about political changes in immigration law. Another one, there was a great editorial cartoon a few years ago that had a sign, and it was like the border, which is famous these days, and then there was this little kind of broken wire fence, and there were some folks on the southern side of it kind of looking across, and there was one big sign that said "Help Wanted" on the U.S. side, and on the other, not too far away from it, there was another sign that said "Keep out." That's American immigration policy in a nutshell. It is deeply schizophrenic and totally contradictory. It doesn't make logical sense. After working in this area, I was a history major in college. So I studied, I wasn't focused on immigration at the time, but history of U.S. policies on immigration and things like that. The only kind of sense it makes is political sense. Every single rule, every single thing about U.S. immigration, if you really drill down to the essence of it, whether it was from 150 years ago, it made political sense at the time for the powers that be at the time. So welcome to the 2016 version. There are not two handouts, there's just one handout. We ran out of the goldenrod colored paper, so some of them are blue. If you want to have a collection, I think there are enough so you can have one of each, or bring one for a friend, but they're the same, so you don't need two. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to start off and kind of, I'll give some breaking news and recent news reports, but the topic is after Trump becomes president, what? How U.S. immigration policies and practices may change in January 2017 and after that. And specifically, we're going to talk about how the very strong Trump anti-immigration rhetoric and agenda, the build the wall, deport them, all kinds of thinking, how may that change U.S. immigration laws and policies in 2017? Actually, because it's actually already a little bit started to shift a little bit, but I'll talk about that. And then how much are different folks at risk for being on the wrong end of immigration, stricter interpretations or enforcement or new laws or new regulations and so forth, and looking specifically at different groups. U.S. citizens are actually affected by this stuff. U.S. employers, green card holders, they don't get a free pass. Foreign students, Fs, Js, and everything else. DACA beneficiaries for sure. Undocumented migrants for sure. And is there anything that a person in one of those situations that might have reason to be watching carefully to see what happens? Is there anything that a person that might be at a little higher risk of a problem, something that they could do now to lower their, now, I mean literally like between now and before Donald Trump gets sworn in as president at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time on January 20th. It's noon in Washington, but it'll be 11 a.m. here. Are there things that you could do to begin building a more robust foundation to whatever your immigration category is if you're not already a U.S. citizen? And then the last thing, if you have a problem, are there other immigration options that might be available? So the little show and tell of what is in the handout for your reference. The first item is the famous Trump 10-point immigration agenda. That's right from the Donald J. Trump website. I just checked it again, printed this off the other day, and they still have it up, and it still has all these things on there. We'll talk more about that. Then the next item is a DACA renewal eligibility screening form from a wonderful organization headquartered here in Minnesota, in St. Paul, in fact, called the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota. It's in downtown St. Paul. ILCM is its nickname. It is a nonprofit organization, and its primary reason for existence has been around for many years. It's probably the most, in my opinion, the most successful organization of its type in the country. And its purpose is to help migrants deal with immigration stuff, whether that is with the state legislature, the local police department, and most importantly with the U.S. federal government and the government agencies and so forth. If there's anybody here who is a DACA person or is related to or has a friend who is a DACA person, I would direct your attention specifically to the questions on their questionnaire. Most people that are DACA eligible people that have signed up nationally, it's about 750,000. In Minnesota, we have, I think, about 4,000. The majority of them are in the Twin Cities area. They've already had a 1-2-year authorization, and then they'd be in some stage, depending on when they started. They might have a pending renewal. They might be about soon to file for a renewal of their 2 years travel document and employment card, or maybe they just got it renewed and it still appears to have a 1.5 years left on it. We'll talk specifically about what might happen to that, between now and or in 2017. But pay particular attention to the questions, and these questions, I'll refer back to them. This is a pretty nice little checklist of things that might have immigration consequences. How will I know if I'm at risk? These questions give you an idea that even if you're an F1 student or a J1 student, or you're an H4 who's in school full-time and you're married to an H1, or whatever your immigration, even if you have a green card and you've had one for years, these are some of the things that an immigration lawyer who has expertise in this area, these are screening questions. Just like you go to the doctor and they check your physical health and said, do you have trouble sleeping at night? Do you have high blood pressure? Do you have pain in your chest when you exercise? A whole bunch of things. These are like this sort of as much as you can condense it down to a half dozen really quickie questions. So one of the things is you want to know if you're a DACA person, when does your DACA expire? What is the expiration date? Because that will drive how fast you might want to do things and what you might want to do. But this is not a do-it-yourself project at this point. I recommend if you can't afford a lawyer, a private lawyer, and there are a bunch of lawyers in Minnesota that do immigration law now. When I started, there were, I think, 4 or 5 part-time people, and now there are a couple hundred that do it most of the time. And some of them have a little experience, and some of them have more than 25 years experience. So, but for people who are poor students and they're good students, but they don't have, they're impecunious. They're temporarily financially embarrassed or whatever. Anyway, what happens when you go to school, you don't get rich. After you get out, hopefully it's economically successful. But while you're a student, usually even if you're in medical school, you're not getting rich. So the Immigrant Law Center has free or reduced fee legal services available by very experienced lawyers and support staff. They've been very familiar with DACA. That office has probably filed most of the DACA cases that have been filed, I believe, in the whole state of Minnesota since this was created. So that's a good place to start. If you make too much money to qualify for them, or you have resources and you want to get a private lawyer, you can do that. But the questions that you may be asked in the first interview will relate to this. So when does it expire? Number 2, is the expiration date more than 150 days away? Number 3, have you been arrested, charged, or convicted for a misdemeanor? Misdemeanors, depending on what state you're in and what it is, a speeding ticket can be a misdemeanor. Usually a parking violation is not. The way I usually phrase this is a screening question when I have somebody in person in my office and say, have you ever had any difficulties with law enforcement officials in any country in the world in your entire life since you were born that was more serious than a parking ticket? That's what the screening question should start being. There's like a very comprehensive medical question. Have you ever had, pain in your chest? Have you ever fainted? It's a pretty straightforward question, and it's very important that you candidly assess that. Now, that doesn't mean your life is over if you had a speeding ticket or 3 of them and a DUI or whatever, but it's something that needs attention by somebody who has expertise, and that's, some of those folks should go in and do that, not wait till January 20th. They should do that. So, and it doesn't matter if it was tickets, juvenile arrests, that's included, even if the case was expunged. That's the strongest thing you can get in a state or federal court in the United States. I was convicted of shoplifting when I was 15 years old, but my lawyer said because I was a juvenile, it didn't count. And by the way, just to be extra double safe and secure, they went to court, they had the judge sign a thing, they permanently sealed the record, and it doesn't exist. And I'm told by the judge and by the lawyer, I can never have to tell any employer or anybody about it. There's a big exception. You have to tell the Immigration Service if they ask. Expungement doesn't know. A federal judge signed this order, said this is expunged. We're eliminated from all the federal records, all the federal databases, but If the government on the immigration form or an interview asks you, have you ever been arrested? If you ever have, the answer is yes. And if you don't truthfully answer that, then you could incur a very serious penalty of being banned from just about everything that's good in the U.S. immigration system. You got Canadians that do this at the border. They get, no, I've never been arrested. I've seen several of these cases over the last 25, 30 years, and they get banned for life. Bang, like that quick. Just because Mr. McIntosh, I've asked you 3 times. You said you've never been arrested. I think that's a lie. I think you made a false statement. Because right here on my computer screen, I have a reprintout from the RCMP with your name, birth date, driver's license number, passport number, and it says you were arrested for shoplifting when you were 17 years old in Toronto. Well, that doesn't count. My lawyer says it doesn't count. Well, the lawyer can say whatever he wants, but the immigration law says they're entitled to inquire and they're entitled to a truthful answer. Better that the person would say nothing than say anything that's not true. That creates trouble. Anyway, so you got to screen for that. And then it goes, there's a second question. Do you have any contact with police? But maybe you didn't think you were arrested. Maybe it was a ticket and it just got lost in a file cabinet. It was the day before you were moving from Boston to Minnesota and nothing ever happened with it. Well, you know, that contact might create a permanent record in a database with the state, you know, of Massachusetts that gets accessed by immigration computers. And if there is a sort of a very extreme enforcement policy that gets adopted after January 20th, then that's information that your immigration doctor would want to know so that they can properly advise you about what you should do, what things are risk or higher risk or low risk for you. And then another question, number 5. Since your initial DACA was approved, have you had any contact with ICE, Immigration Customs and Enforcement Agency, or been placed in removal proceedings? That's a fancy word for deportation court. You would probably know if that happened to you. Since your initial DACA was approved, have you traveled outside the United States? Travel by itself for anybody who's not a U.S. citizen with current valid documentation that proves they're U.S. citizens, such as a passport. Driver's license doesn't prove citizenship. It's just some evidence of identity. Every human being that's outside the United States that's trying to come into the United States, the job of the Customs and Border Protection Agency is only to let people in if they're allowed to come in. And the laws set all these rules about how you decide who gets in. And U.S. citizens have a right to return to the United States, but the burden is on them to prove that they're a U.S. citizen. They don't have to take somebody's word for it. Years ago, I was staying up on the North Shore near Grand Borene, Minnesota, and it was a nice day, and I decided, oh, what the heck, I'll drive up to Thunder Bay. I haven't been up there for a while. This is about 15, 20 years ago. And I drove to Thunder Bay, and the Canadian said, hi, welcome to Canada. I said, yeah, I'm just going up for a couple hours, and I'm going to turn around and come back. Came back, pulled over, and came into the U.S., and said, are you a U.S. citizen? Yes, sir. Said, yeah, I just came through here about 3 hours ago. I'm just coming back. Said, do you have some identification? Well, probably. Let me see. Looked around, said, oh my gosh. I just brought my cash and a couple credit cards. I left this back in my hotel room. I've got a business card, but driver's license. No, I don't have it with me. Sorry. So, this is, a border, and I could refuse to let you in. And so I started making wonders. Now this is a little embarrassing. I'm an immigration lawyer and I'm a doctor. But the officer said, well, next time, bring some ID with you when you cross the border. Well, now, post 9/11, you can't even think about doing that anymore. And now you get on an airplane, domestically, I usually use a passport as my identification document for domestic travel. But anyway, so, and the contact information, if you want to contact the ILCM, Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, they've got a fax number, email number, and their address is there. And then on the next page, they've got a screening policy for intake procedures. They've got a telephone number you can call. DACA cases, I believe, are still a priority. So otherwise, you might have to wait weeks to see somebody. But if you're in a situation where some of this stuff might apply to you, and by the way, their financial cutoff, I think, is 187% of the poverty guideline. Gene, what's the current poverty guideline for Minnesota for a household of 1 or 2 people, approximately? About 19,000. So this is like 80% more. So it's like approximately, less. If your household income is less than probably $25,000, $30,000 a year, and you're a student and you live alone, you know, if you make more money than that, you probably don't qualify for their free, you know, legal services. But not very many students make more than $25,000 a year working in the library or at Starbucks. So most of the folks here probably aren't affected. But again, if there's some people here who are neurosurgeons who make $500,000 a year, don't even bother to call them because they'll say, go hire a private lawyer, you don't meet the guidelines. Next item is a thing that I wrote down now. It says immigration options for professors and researchers. I know that most of you folks are not professors and researchers yet. Some of you will be, I imagine, in the future. But the reason I do that is the first 3 bullet points on that first page, there's some useful attachments, just like there was that checklist for Immigrant Law Center for DACA cases. And I apologize, this is a little bit, you know, technical. This was actually something I prepared. It's the lead article for the leading book that the American Immigration Lawyers Association publishes on immigration options for academics and researchers and stuff. So it's aimed at other immigration lawyers and universities. But I think the checklist you'll find useful. So you flip ahead. There's also the section on practical tips. Some of that is good advice in general. Do not underestimate the complexity of immigration compliance documentation, et cetera. And so anyway, here's a document. Attachment A is a checklist of temporary immigration options for professors and researchers. Just scratch off, pretend that professors and researchers thing isn't there. 90% of all that stuff still applies to you, whether you're undocumented, DACA, F1, H1, whatever. So they're ranked in order of how much employment authorization. So there are options first that have no or very limited employment authorization, then there are options that have position-specific, employer-specific employment authorization, sort of a license to be in the U.S. and to work. And then there are options with broad employment authorization, and then there are options of last resort. There are several hundred different categories. Because if we had 2 or 3 days, we could probably get into some of them a little bit, but we couldn't cover all of them. Next page is a similar kind of list for ways of getting green cards. And there are more than 100 different ways of getting permanent residence in the United States. Each has its own specific rules. Some of them have their own specific forms. But this gives you a quick glance checklist of things that are there. Next is the C, Appendix C, that says checklist of key questions for professors and researchers seeking employment authorization. I'd say we could, with minimal modification, at 90% of this, you can do a self-assessment or pass along to somebody else. Checklist of key questions for persons seeking immigration status or employment permission. And these are kind of questions that an in-depth, in-person, confidential interview with an experienced immigration lawyer that a lawyer will often screen for this because it will help identify potential complication areas and potential opportunities. And every one of those questions has a reason that it's in there because it relates to some immigration things, especially the questions on Roman numeral 6, immigration and personal history, and that's that. Then last thing is a thing called U.S. Immigration Overview. I've got an updated version that I'm going to probably hold off on until probably sometime in 2017 because I expect there are going to be some changes. I haven't revised this in a couple of years. It was for a British publication called International Who's Who of Immigration Lawyers. But I'd say I'd stand behind 90% of this is still accurate. Some of it's historical and some of it lays out what options are available. If anybody wants to get a copy of the new one that comes out, you give Gene or me an email, we'll send it to you. Okay, so we're going to get into the details of this in a moment, but as my MIE friends, you know, I like to start with some breaking news. So we're going to, like they say on public radio, first this news. Okay, yesterday morning, as I was preparing for this, this was on the front page of the Minneapolis Star Tribune. Constant fear as immigrants brace for life under Trump. Split. Flip over the top of the newspaper, and right above that says, Trump cuts back border plan. This is fast changing, by the hour, literally. Things are changing here. Same day, Monday's New York Times, top above the fold. On immigrants, President-elect's views appear in flux. And then right next to it, Trump's choices on top advisors split, magic word, power in two. Insider and firebrand. Priebus is chief of staff, but a far-right voice will carry sway. And that would be Steve Bannon. A little bit more about him later. Some things happened after the election. On election night, maybe some of you may have heard this, depending unless you just turned off your television and covered your ears. But what was something that happened even before by midnight on election night, the volume of inquiries on the Canadian immigration site for people in the United States that want to consider going to Canada, it crashed because it got overloaded. It wasn't a denial of service attack. It was just that many people, tried to use it at the same time. And I thought it was just a joke. You'd be people, well, if the opinion on election comes out, do you know anything about Canada? I said, I got a little bit, but yeah, ha. Anyway, so and that's continued. The other thing, that this is a less reported story, New Zealand, which is kind of far away. It's a beautiful country. I strongly recommend, before you die, New Zealand is a country you should go visit for at least 2 or 3 weeks minimum. It is kind of far away from everything. It's the closest place to get to Antarctica from. That's how far away it is. But anyway, New Zealand typically gets about 3,000 inquiries a month from people in the United States inquiring, what's that? So is that 100 a day, I guess, that people say they're looking for a student visa, work visa, just generally inquiring. In one day, they got 20,000 from the U.S. They have a more robust system. It didn't crash it, but they had the numbers. So that would be like, it's not 100. It's probably a 100-fold, more than a couple 100-fold increase. So that's what's going on. Internationally, Chancellor Angela Merkel, day after the election, whose immigration policies Mr. Trump has dismissed as, quote, insane, offered her cooperation but emphasized the importance of human rights. President Francois Hollande of, however you pronounce that, I didn't take French, noted that some of Mr. Trump's views might test the values and interests that we share with the U.S. Mexican officials congratulated Mr. Trump, but said they would not pay for his wall. Okay, and then there's, I'm a political junkie, again, as my MIE, DSO, and NRO International Office friends know. So actually, I read this stuff on both sides and whatever. So this is Donald Trump's contract with the American voter. Number 1, 6 measures to clean up the corruption and special interest collusion in Washington. Propose a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on all members of Congress. And then in the Illegal Immigration Act, all the stuff he's going to do in the first 100 days. He had a separate list of the first 100-day list that they put out. So here's some of the stuff from the first 100-day list. He said, anybody know the person who is the most powerful Republican currently in the United States government? He's in the U.S. Senate.
All right.
Well, that's probably true. That he is the most powerful, the second most powerful. Mitch McConnell. He's the majority leader of the Senate. But Paul Ryan, I agree. Paul Ryan has got more influence over this because he controls the money indirectly. On Trump's proposal, goal number one on the contract with America was term limits for all members of Congress. And this was on November 9th, the day after the election. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell mostly made nice with Trump. On Trump's proposal to impose term limits on Congress, McConnell said, I apologize, I won't do this with a proper accent, but it will not be on the agenda in the Senate. I would say we have term limits now. They're called elections. And then he said, the first thing under a list of 7 actions to protect American workers. First, I will announce my intention to renegotiate NAFTA or withdraw from the deal under Article 2205. Well, treaties can be broken, but if you follow the rules of the treaty, you can't break it without giving a notice to the other side, and this is a process. But again, there's a difference between sound bites and sloganeering and what actually happens. What actually happens is a lot more complicated, potentially. Okay, so here's some numbers. So there's going to be some opinion mixed in here, but some basic facts. Immigrants in the country that are undocumented or overstayed illegally, best estimates about 11 million. Criminal immigrants, as of 2012, the government estimated that 1.9 million immigrants were convicted criminals and could face deportation. That includes people who have green cards. In fact, most of that 1.9 million is people who are permanent residents of the United States. And some of the things that they've been convicted of are speeding tickets and DUIs. It doesn't say what kind. They're not murderers and bank robbers, all of them. Some probably are, but that's a tiny minority. Of the criminal immigrants with that broad definition, and that's some of the people, when they did these roundups in the past, they were a lot better at catching people that had speeding tickets or DUIs and putting them in deportation proceedings than getting drug dealers and narco-terrorists. That's a lot harder work. It's much easier to just get the phone call from the local sheriff in Kennebec County and say, hey, I got one of these foreigner guys here, you want them? And they detain them, because they can just do that, and then they get caught up in the system and whatever. Okay, but about 820,000 of the criminal immigrants are here without a status. Again, that includes minor traffic violations as well as more serious things. So you're talking about, maybe 200,000 or 300,000 people that have done something that is not a misdemeanor. And most of those people are currently in jail in U.S. state and federal prisons serving out sentences. So it's not a mystery where they are. Current U.S. law says you can't deport them until they finish their sentence, because we want to make sure they pay the penalty for their crime. So this is fantasy numbers. Deportations under President Barack Obama, 2.5 million. He was sometimes criticized as the deporter-in-chief, because under Obama administration, more human beings have been deported from the United States than under the presidency of any other person who's ever been president. A deportation cost. The government estimates under current system, it costs about $12,000 to the government, not causing the collateral disruption to everybody else, for each person. Immigration court backlog. There are more than 500,000 cases that are currently pending in immigration court. The lines are getting longer. They've added more judges. It takes time to hire judges and train them and everything, and you have to hire the assistants, and you have to get, GSA has to rent office space to have courtrooms, whatever. And the delays for immigration cases that make it to immigration court are measured currently in years overall. Eventually, if you put that much of a surge, you would measure it in decades. So you would just clog up that system. Okay, immigrants with pending deportation orders, 88,000. Young immigrants that were protected by DACA, we already talked about 740,000. Border fence, there's about 650 miles of existing fencing already in place along the Mexican border. The length of the Mexican border is about 2,000 miles. Border patrol agents, there are about 18,000 agents patrolling the U.S. border with Mexico from the U.S. side. Arrests at the border, about 400,000 were arrested trying to cross the border during the 2016 budget year that ended in September, this past September. And for the last several years, more people have left the United States and gone to Mexico, who are Mexican citizens, than have come from Mexico legally or illegally into the United States. So there's a lot of stuff here where the facts don't kind of match the reality. Changes that Trump is proposing that could be fast. While Obama had been moving to create openings for undocumented folks to obtain legal status and increase the number of refugees, Trump has said that he would start construction right away on his border wall, and also he would immediately cancel Obama's DACA program and the DAPA program, the Deferred Action for Parents of Childhood Arrivals. He would also permanently he'd initiate a campaign to deport some of the famous deportation force in the first year of his presidency, which he described as up to 2 million undocumented immigrants with criminal records, bearing in mind what that might mean. Although he's not explained how he reached the estimate. Enforcement operations would ramp up. He's pledged extreme vetting for refugees and a complete halt of Syrian refugees. He would have to, before anybody could come in as a refugee, they would have to pass something he called an ideological certification, whatever that might be. He will tighten security throughout the immigration system, including on foreigners coming here legally to work or to reunite with their families. Although that system already has crippling backlogs, Trump wants to further reduce legal immigration from its current levels, but he would need approval of Congress to do that. Trump's election is set the stage for H-1 reform. There are people, Jeff Sessions is a name if you follow politics, who's one of the core group of a half dozen people around Trump. He's a senator from Alabama. And he is very anti all types of H-1 workers. And they have some leverage because he's the chair of the Senate Immigration Subcommittee. So what kinds of things could he really do? Experts agree that Trump would wipe away Obama's legacy on immigration, most notably his Deferred Action Program affecting the Dreamers. Expect a sea change in the enforcement system, said a former head of U.S. ICE Immigration and Customs Enforcement. You'll see a dramatic reversal back to the roundups and policies that existed prior to the Obama administration. Trump has been consistent about the wall and the deport 11 million, but experts, and I agree with these folks, say that those promises are wildly unrealistic, and the business about using the Patriot Act to impound the remittances of undocumented immigrants, the Western Union transmittal of $50 a week, He would rely on a part of the Patriot Act to do that. Even that's constitutionally and legally questionable, would probably be challenged in court. But even if he did that, the banking industry would leave that industry. They don't want to be caught in the middle of that. So they would shut that stuff down, and there wouldn't be any money, because they would collect it from Wells Fargo or whatever, and Wells Fargo say, we're out of that business. We don't want to deal with it. And even if the Treasury did collect the money, then you would have to go back to Congress to get permission to spend the money. It's not a piggy bank for whoever's the president. Mandatory e-verify system is another thing that they want to do, which is where employers would have to check an electronic database before they hired anybody, including U.S. citizens. Tripling ICE agents, these things, building the wall, they're outrageously expensive, the former ICE head said. Some estimates around $500 billion, $1 trillion, not counting the economic disruptions, whatever. Another analysis of some of the stuff that might happen. He vowed, Trump said he would immediately terminate the deportation relief, the DACA, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Trump does have the power to do that. It was created by a presidential action, but anything that was done by a presidential action can be reversed by that president or a subsequent president. So if you want to look at the glass as half empty and be prepared for the worst, then you could say, well, he said he's going to do this, and like right after he takes the oath of office, I promise to uphold the U.S. Constitution, whatever. It's like 12:02 p.m. Eastern time. He can say, I have prepared documents for my signature, and I'm going to sign them here in my press conference after the inauguration. I have just officially ended DACA, and it's retroactive. So all those questions, I've instructed this special, task force that was, set out, and this is going to happen. I don't think that's the most likely outcome, but legally, is it possible? Yes. Increasing deportation and detentions, all these things in the border wall, they have to cost a lot of money. Another one is he wants to, the 14th Amendment of the U.S., this goes back to the Civil War, the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens. He said that he wants to deny citizenship to the children born in the United States who had undocumented parent or parents. He's come up with his own theory that the 14th Amendment doesn't mean what it says and what 150 years of Supreme Court and other court decisions have said it means. Okay. Reince Priebus from Wisconsin is one of the core people. He was just announced. We've looked closely at who the appointments are. He's a good buddy of Paul Ryan's. They're actually from the same area of Wisconsin. He grew up in Green Bay, and Reince Priebus is from Janesville area. And Reince Priebus, I was kind of looking like the glass half full with what's going to happen here. That kind of made me relax a little bit, because he was the author. He was the head of the Republican National Committee after he was for the Romney campaign. And after the Romney campaign, they did this thing that was famously called an autopsy. Why did the Republicans lose the election? Well, first, we didn't get very many women to vote for us. We didn't get very many Latinos. We didn't get very many immigrants. We didn't get very many minorities, African Americans. So we have to change our attitude. We have to have a more middle-of-the-road policy on immigration, and we got to do it soon. And we have to reach out to these communities. Otherwise, there will never be another president elected again with this kind of a platform, because the demographics are against us. Eventually, Texas will be like California before the election even starts for president in, take your pick, 10, 20 years from now. It's a majority-minority state, and there will be no statewide Republican office holders, no state governor, no state dog catcher, no state U.S. senators from there, because it will be 60% blue in every national election. If that happens, pretty hard to build those electoral maps, that get you to 270. But then, same announcement. Okay, about Steve Bannon. Okay, an anonymous sign, this is from today's editorial in the New York Times. An anonymous sign of what the Trump presidency might mean, what it actually looked like. Trump appointed Steve Bannon as his chief White House strategist and senior counsel, an extremely influential post. Like right down the hall in the White House, he has an office there. He's the executive chairman of something called Breitbart News, a parent company of the far-right website Breitbart News, which under Bannon became what the Southern Poverty Law Center has called a white ethno-nationalist propaganda mill. Bannon himself did an interview. They said that Breitbart was now the platform for the alt-right, a loosely organized group of mostly young men who believe in white supremacy, oppose immigration, feminism, and multiculturalism, and delight in harassing Jews, Muslims, and other vulnerable groups by spewing shocking insults on social media. And this is just a couple of examples. Hoisted high and proud, the Confederate flag proclaims a glorious heritage. That headline was 2 weeks after a white supremacist massacred 9 black churchgoers in Charleston, South Carolina. That's how in your face this stuff is. Gabby Giffords, the gun control movement's human shield, the congressman. The chairman of the American Nazi Party, this is yesterday, or no, it was last summer. Chairman of the American Nazi Party, no, this was yesterday, of the American Nazi Party said the pic of Mr. Bannon showed that Mr. Trump might be for real. David Duke, the former imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, called the choice excellent and said Mr. Bannon was basically creating the ideological aspects of where we're going. Bannon, in some ways, a perplexing figure. Far-right ideologue, made money investing in Seinfeld, former Goldman Sachs banker, who has called himself a Leninist with a goal to destroy the state and bring everything crashing down. He wrote of the Republican leadership, let the grassroots turn on the hate because that's the only thing that will make them do their duty. Glenn Beck, if you follow politics, Glenn Beck is a kind of a right-wing guy. He said that Bannon is a nightmare and a terrifying man. Another news item. This was yesterday. FBI report, hate crimes against Muslims increased by 67% in 2015. That was not the election year. That was January 2015 to December 2015. They went up by 67% then. And you can follow the news, it's been more recently things happening. Last year there were 257 reported incidents of anti-Muslim bias compared to 154 in 2014. The number of reported hate crimes against Muslims peaked at 481 in 2001 after 9/11.
Scott?
Yes.
Excuse me. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
With all due respect, we're all here, and I think most of us are really hurting and really scared.
Yeah.
And
That's perfect. Let me finish this. This was a thing I would recommend to you. Sorry to cut you off, but what do we tell the children?
Yeah.
Okay. This was something. It was on the Huffington Post. It's pretty short. It's from a PhD educator teacher. What should I say to my students after the election if Trump wins? A principal asked me recently. Good question. What should we tell our children? Tell them first, we will protect them. Tell them that we have democratic processes in the U.S. that make it impossible for one mean person to do too much damage. Tell them we will protect those democratic processes and we will use them so that Trump is unable to act on many of the false promises he made during his campaign. Tell them second, that you will honor the outcome of the election, that you will fight bigotry. Tell them bigotry is not a democratic value and that it will not be tolerated at your school. Tell them you stand by your Muslim families, your same-sex parent families, your gay students, your black families, your female students, your Mexican families, your disabled students, your immigrant families, your trans students, your native students. Tell them you won't let anyone hurt them or deport them or threaten them without having to contend with you first. Say that you will stay united as a school community, that you will protect one another, say that silence is dangerous, and teach them how to speak up when something is wrong. Teach them how to speak up, how to love one another, how to understand each other, how to solve conflicts, how to live with the diverse and sometimes conflicting ideologies. Give them skills to enter a world that doesn't know how to do this. Teach them third, how to be a responsible member of civic society. Teach them how to engage in discussion, not for the sake of winning, but for the sake of understanding and being understood. Students need to learn how to check the facts, weigh news sources, question taken for granted assumptions, see their own biases, take feedback, challenge one another. We need to teach students to disagree with love and respect. Finally, remind them to ease their minds that not everyone who voted for Donald Trump did so because they believe the bigoted things that he has said this year. Many of them voted for Trump because they feel frustrated with the economy, feel socially left behind. They're exercising the one power they have. We need to challenge Trump and his supporters to differentiate between their fears and the bigotry catalyzed by those fears. And then specifically in the higher ed. Is this helpful?
Who said that?
The guy's name is Ali Michael, Alimachael, and it went up on November 8th, the day, election day, just before midnight, actually. So maybe it was written right then. And it was on Huffington Post, so Ali, Michael, PhD. And then specifically in the higher education context, this is an article from a British paper. Janet Napolitano, president of the University of California, announced this week, this was dated this Sunday, announced this week that she would be meeting with undocumented students and said the institution remained committed to supporting these students. In the wake of her comments, students and professors across the University of California system, one of the largest public college systems in the country, are now pushing administrators to take aggressive steps to protect thousands of undocumented students from potentially devastating policies, which could strip them of basic rights and lead to mass deportations. Some have urged UC to be a leader, what they hope will be an organized movement of American universities fighting back against Trump by forming sanctuary campuses that refuse to cooperate with federal immigration authorities. The mayor of Minneapolis and many other cities around the United States have said that, you know, we've got stuff to do to run our city. We don't want to make people scared of us. We don't want people afraid to call the police if they're a victim of a crime. So we're not going to cooperate. We don't have to. And there's going to be a battle between some folks in that. California as a state and California's public university system already has multiple progressive policies designed to support undocumented immigrants, including measures that help them get access to health care, driver's licenses, and student loans. Across the state, UC's 10 campuses have resources tailored to undocumented people. So some ideas there. And this again, a little more glass half full. Paul Ryan said on Sunday that Donald Trump isn't planning to have a roving deportation force. And so people shouldn't worry about that. House Republicans, including the person who is a chair of a key committee, who's a Republican, this is Michael McCaul. He's the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, has called a wall along the entire border a knee-jerk reaction and has not mentioned the idea in any legislation on Capitol Hill. If Congress stands up to Trump, the wall might turn out to be a fence extension. Congress won't fund it probably, and Mexico will pay for it, but to save face, President Trump and congressional leaders may agree to a modest extension of the existing border fence. The National Border Patrol Council, the union representing border agents, your former union perhaps, said the agency had already had a difficult time trying to meet the existing hiring goals mandated by Congress. And if you're going to triple the force, that would just aggravate that problem. And then, again, this is, again, the last 24 hours. Donald Trump appears to soften stance on immigration. And this was from his 60 Minutes interview. He said his priority was to deport 2 to 3 million immigrants he characterized as dangerous or having criminal records, a change from his original position that he would deport 11 million, all the undocumented. Trump's starting to sound like Obama on immigration. This is also from the Associated Press from yesterday. Focus on criminals. What we're doing is, this is a Trump quote, we're to get the people that are criminal and have criminal records, gang members, drug dealers. We have a lot of these people, probably 2 million, it could even be 3 million. We're getting them out of our country, we're going to incarcerate. You know, because you have some more facts, that's probably an extreme exaggeration. There aren't 2 to 3 million people that fit that description.
Scott, something
yes.
we're going to have to do at a class. Can you, is there a
Okay, let me
issues?
Let me wrap that up and go back to the thing. So there's the little chart I did. This is a crude diagram of how the U.S. legal system works, not just immigration. So the most powerful thing is the U.S. Constitution. Then you have statutory law that only comes from Congress. Then there are court decisions that interpret what those other 2 things are. Then there are federal regulations, immigration regulations. And then there are memos and guidances and policy guidelines. Then there's speeches by government officials. Then there's what politicians and pundits say on television or campaign speeches. And then there's what the employees, and then there's what government employees actually do, the culture. And that could change. Even if this other stuff never changed, the culture changes depending on the bottom up and sideways and all kinds of things. That's already starting to happen a little bit. And then you have the individual discretion that immigration officers have in every level of the system. And just like police officers, I can give you a warning ticket or I'm going to arrest you. And so there's that. And then everything below that is noise and gossip and who knows what. Most of the stuff that we're talking about, it takes a long time to defend the U.S. Constitution. The statutory law, that's in the court decisions and the federal regulations. Anything from here on up, and this is the actual capital L law of the United States, this takes months to change, maybe years. And so relax, the status quo will probably continue at least until January 20th. So our first question on the little sheet I had prepared is, will the Trump agenda change U.S. immigration laws and policies in 2017 and beyond? Almost certainly. Exactly how and how much and when, that will vary. Some specific things that are likely to change. DACA folks are the most at risk of a change in policy. people that have any kind of involvement with law enforcement or have ever had that, even if you had a green card for 20 years, but 15 years ago you got arrested for something and it just kind of slid under the radar, that could surface and that could create an issue. So the executive actions would happen. So there's the stuff between now and January 20th, and that'll probably be status quo. All the rules will probably stay the same under the Obama administration and the people. What happens, there'll be a lot of noise about what the new administration is going to do, but he can't, it's not a one-man show like he's kind of run his businesses. Just the Department of Homeland Security alone has 250,000 employees. And you can sit in Washington, as many people, I've talked to people who are secretaries of the Department of Homeland Security, say it's great, I can write this memo, I can change this regulation and give this speech, but that doesn't mean that, the general gives the order, but that doesn't mean all the privates do. Actually, hey, the private says, I'm only doing what my sergeant tells me, and the sergeant says, I'm only doing what my lieutenant wants me to do. And you have this, command influence, but it takes a long time to change direction. So then there's the stuff that happens from January 20th on, and say for the next probably 6 months from January until June, there'll be a lot of speeches and a lot of noise, and there'll be new people in charge of the various government departments. But there may be, again, not stuff that on the ground actually affects people all that much on a day-to-day basis. Inertia is a reasonable forecast, just like weather forecasting for 20 minutes from now. I predict it'll be the same as it is right now, and usually you're going to be right. So, but the further out you get into the year, into March and April, Congress has a time to get itself organized. They might try to pass some laws quickly, the first 100 days thing. Some of that stuff will change, and some of it will have to do with immigration. Exactly what, we'll see, and that'll be all covered like crazy in the media. And then the stuff that's longer term, like actually changing the law or getting Congress to pay for building things, that could take 6 months to a year or more. Are some people, question number 2, are some groups at risk? Yes. There are, let's see, go back to another sheet here. Okay, the U.S. citizens are at risk if you have a family member that is affected by this. If you're an employer, you could be affected by the things that were coming to be stricter enforcement against employers that hire undocumented people, or they're going to not be able to get the key workers that they need. Permanent residents that have any kind of a criminal history, or they get a DUI tomorrow, or on February 15th. That could have a different actual probable consequence for them than that same thing happened to them yesterday or 2 years ago. So they should be aware of that. There are things that can be done with a change of that culture from the top down for students and non-immigrants. There's something called 214B. It's the #1 reason that most people get rejected for B visitor visas and F visas and J visas. They don't prove that they have temporary, the only intentions to come to the United States. And the presumption of the law is that you're guilty of having permanent intentions until you prove that you don't. And they just have to change the attitude a little bit. And all of a sudden, the denial rates could skyrocket. And people at the border coming back, I'm not letting you back into the country from Canada. You went up there for, a birthday party, but even though you're, an F1 and everything is fine, I'm not letting you in because you didn't convince me. That could happen. It could be targeted at Muslims or Syrians or whatever. And we already talked about the DACA folks. Lower risk, here's some tips. Don't ever give any incorrect information to the U.S. immigration authorities on any form or any spoken interview, whether that's at the consulate, at the airport, any place. That's the #1 source of problems. If they perceive that you gave them inaccurate information, that's almost as bad as actually giving them inaccurate information. So you need to be both accurate and make sure that's clearly understood. Stay out of trouble with the police or law enforcement. Don't hang around people that smoke marijuana. Because if you're in a room and somebody gets arrested and you happen to be there, hey, you might get charged too. But the consequence is very different if you're not a U.S. citizen than if you are a U.S. citizen. It can be catastrophic under these very harsh anti-immigration laws that were passed back in the 90s. Basically, possession of a small quantity of marijuana is the same as selling heroin to school children as far as it being a deportable offense. It's very serious. Like when my son was a teenager, I said to him, don't ride with anybody from a party. If the driver is impaired, do not get in the car with them. Just don't do that. So don't hang around folks. That'll lower your risk a little bit. Travel. Any travel, there's risk. And if you fit a certain kind of risk, tick enough boxes. If you're Syrian, F1, and even though your family has got refugee status in Germany and you're a student in the United States and you usually go back around New Year's holidays, you might want to think twice about that. You might not be coming back as fast as you think. I don't want to say that it will automatically be a problem, but there is a risk there. And so people ask the lawyer, so what can I do to reduce my risk as low as possible? I said, well, if you're here, in most cases, don't leave. Follow all the rules for the category that you're in. Make sure you understand what the rules are so you can follow them. Then the last part is what can you do to make your situation even stronger? So there's a hierarchy of categories. The strongest thing is if you can legally get yourself into U.S. citizenship as quickly as possible. That's the ultimate defense. That's the flu shot. I mean that's as close to a cure as we've got to any immigration problems. The next is if you can get yourself into a permanent resident status, a green card. And that also is the next best thing. And you can convert that into citizenship within a few years, usually with a high probability. Over 90% of people that want to successfully do that within 3 to 5 years after they get their green card. If you are in a temporary status, such as the alphabet soup, F1s, J1s, H1s, whatever, you should look sooner than you might otherwise. And is there a possibility that you might be able to get sponsored for a green card on a family basis, on an employment basis, on an investment entrepreneurial basis? There are lots of pathways to green cards. And it's not a self-diagnosis thing, unfortunately. You should talk to an experienced immigration lawyer so you can know what all your options are, particularly people at a school like McAllister, University of Minnesota, University of Wisconsin. I talk to these folks a lot, for years, and a lot of them now, they're entrepreneurs. They've got STEM degrees, and they've got employers, but they've got a business idea, and they've got some people with some capital, and that could be a more robust status. Of all the alphabet categories, the better protected ones are H1, L1, O1, and E. If you can get into any of those categories, then that temporary intention thing goes away. So even if there's an attitude change by the U.S. State Department, because they put the Jeff Sessions in charge of the State Department, which his name has been floated as the Secretary of State, and that would be interesting. Or at crossing the border, that you feel a little more comfortable with travel if you're in one of those 4 protected categories: H1, L1, O1, or E. Pardon?
Religious visa?
R1.
R1 doesn't have the same protection as those other 4, but that's another alternative too. I think that's on the list that is in there. I think with that, maybe we should switch it over to the questions. I think the folks that are on the radio hookup, did you want, Aaron?
Well, you keep those going for those ones that I gave you in advance.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Tell
Let
me
me
when.
just find my next questions.
So F1 and OPT employment. That was.
Okay. I wrote down some notes of some answers. I just have to find them. I think I buried them. If you're while I'm looking for those advanced Q&A questions that I got, here we go. Here I got them. Okay, I'm going to wander around a little bit because I don't want to spend the whole time sitting at the podium. So, do you want me to just do them in the order?
Yeah, that would be
got?
great.
Okay, so these are some questions that I got from Lu Yen and Aaron and Kara. Employment-related questions. Changes that could happen with CPT, OPT, STEM extension. I don't expect any changes in those between now and January 20th. If you have the possibility of being eligible for any of those things, I would apply at the earliest possible time. Talk to Aaron or your international folks and get that done early. If it's pending on January 20th, probably the inertia will carry it through. If there aren't any announcements, I don't expect there would be to change those things after that. File as early as the rules permit you to do. And I think that's not high on the list of priorities, but there could be some changes there, in that 6 to 12 months down the road. If we do this again, there will be some other stuff to report on. Changes in H-1Bs. Business as usual, I expect. There will probably be legislation introduced that will try to restrict H-1s, maybe require an employer to advertise and prove a shortage of U.S. workers, or restrict it to people with certain kinds of degrees. That's already happened a little bit, but that has to go through Congress. And that is a months-long process at a minimum. And it's going to be very contentious and get caught up with other stuff. So I'd say assume that the H-1 system as it currently exists will continue to operate through this year's lottery filing season, and start early, and say this is not too soon. January is starting to get where the timing is a little sensitive. If you wait until March to start working on an H-1 or your employer to do that, you might miss out because you won't even get it filed by the April deadline.
And how about Jeff Sessions trying to get rid of
Legislative.
Yeah.
Legislative. But there are people that love it, there are people that hate it, there are people in between, and it would be very contentious. And I could do a whole session just on H-1 stuff. DACA employment. I do not expect there will be any changes whatsoever between now and noon on January 20th in Washington, D.C. After that, it is too soon to say. I'd say it's more likely than not that there will be changes. Exactly what those changes are, how harsh they are, if they try to make them retroactive and sort of terminate people that just got it renewed and it's valid from January 1st of 2017 to January or December 31st of 2018. They might try to adopt a change in the rule that gets rid of that. But you don't know, you have to wait and see. So that's another reason to go while the window is, the door is open, and lock down and improve your status. Move on to, can my F or J status automatically be revoked by the next president or the Trump administration? No, there's no automatic revocation unless they change a law or adopt an executive order. They could, the F and J status is a regulatory thing. And so I don't think it would be appropriate to have an executive order that says everybody's F and J status is revoked, or if you have too many parking tickets or library fines, you're now revoked and the ICE people are going to come looking for you. I wouldn't worry about that. There could be changes in the F and J regulations, but that falls into the 6 months to 1 year plus zone and is not a priority of the Trump administration at this point. Talk about risk, compliance, and defining criminal. Well, risk and compliance have both a criminal and a regular law dimension. As far as criminal law, that's defined by state and federal and local laws about what's considered to be speeding and different kinds of violations. And so the basic advice is don't get involved in anything that is or might be criminal. That's not a joke. I just think you should be careful. The risk and compliance on immigration, we already talked about all that. Is there a tipping point at which someone should be more worried? Yeah, I'd say if anybody who's not a U.S. citizen that has any unfriendly interaction with any law enforcement official on any level, from state, local sheriff, policeman on the corner, on up to an ICE agent or whatever, anything like that, the basic rules are that you're allowed to say, I want to have a lawyer, and that's all I'm saying. Thank you very much. I'm not trying to be uncooperative, but I want to do things the right way, and I do have rights. Even if you're here undocumented, you're still a human being and a person, and persons in the Constitution have the right to remain silent if they're potentially accused of a crime or something like that, or if you're not sure. Say, I'm not going to say anything more. And the folks that work for the enforcement agency, some of them are very effective. They got a badge and they got, so are you going to be uncooperative then, huh? I don't want to have any trouble with you, Mr. Officer. But if you have the self-discipline to do that, and then you will probably be given the phone call opportunity, or if at some point your friends or relatives will start looking for you, and they'll check the hospital and they'll check the police and say, oh, there you are, immigration victim. Okay, and so I would say in terms of what criminal things, that more serious than a parking ticket, I think then you'd be on the safe side. You might be over cautious, but it's better to be over cautious than miss it and say, oh, I didn't check on this and now I got a problem. Yes?
Can you give any advice for students who are interested in protesting, who are undocumented?
Don't break the law when you're doing it. I think that the First Amendment is not limited to U.S. citizens, absolutely. You're still a person. So I'd say, and there will be more things like look at the University of California and the sanctuary universities and things like that. There'll be some guidance coming out of NAFSA and other places like that. So I can't give you specific advice of, even if I were an expert on criminal laws about, workplaces, if you're demonstrating in front of a hospital and preventing an ambulance getting in, you might get arrested for obstruction of the hospital or something. So you want to be careful, about that. But I think in principle, you certainly anything, writing articles or blogging or whatever, speech, I don't think that's likely to be a problem. When it crosses over into speech mixed with action, I think there are potentially other issues. So if I continue with these questions? Okay. If an international student or scholar or faculty member is arrested or taken or a member of the family into custody by ICE, do they get a phone call? ICE generally does not enforce criminal laws. Most of the U.S. immigration laws are what are called civil laws. And a civil law, the simple distinction between a civil law and a criminal law is a criminal law is something that in the worst case you could be sent to jail for 20 minutes, the rest of your life, or something in between. If the worst thing that can happen to you is the government will sue you or say you owe them some money or say we won't give you a license for that, that's a civil kind of consequence. That is less clear. But if somebody restrains your liberty of movement, then I think you probably would be able to see, ask, am I under arrest? Am I free to leave? I need to get to my class. I need to go back home. I'm getting tired. It was a long day. You say, no, you're not free to leave. At that point, so you're saying I'm under arrest. That they're restraining your ability, to move. And so then, what if the arrest is made by city police, county sheriff, or state patrol? Do they still get a phone call? I'd say I do not know of a single reported instance that a person, whether detained by ICE or anybody else, was denied a phone call. It may not be the first thing they do. If you're a U.S. citizen and get arrested for a DUI or something, they may not let you call from your cell phone out on the highway. They say, we'll deal with that later when you get your booked. Right now, I want you to blow up this balloon, and I want you to put your finger on your nose with your eyes closed and take a few steps. There are whole lots of criminal law cases about when do they have to let you have the phone call. Oh, I got the wrong number. I called 3 times. They didn't answer the phone. I got the answering machine. You don't get an infinite number. You have to be reasonable about it. But do you have anything, Bruce, that you would add about somebody who's detained? Is the practice in Minnesota by ICE historically that they let a person have a phone call at some point?
They do let them, but
yeah.
Maybe not until they get back to detention.
Yeah, and that could be, and there's often a lot of people get detained on Friday nights, I've noticed, historically. You get, as an immigration lawyer, you get the phone call at 11 o'clock on Friday night. My sister, my brother, my son, my father got arrested, and he's out at the such and such county jail, which is not a federal government office, and he got dropped off there by some immigration guys who are paying rent there. And the local jail guy says, our policy, he's an ICE detainee, and so my policy is I don't let them have phone calls. But the ICE guy will be back on Monday morning, so they let them cool their heels there over the weekend. Comments on that?
Yeah, that's correct. They might, depending on the time of day and the time of the week, they might take them back to detention, but then at some point they would get a phone call to get an immigration lawyer.
Yep.
Civil
and a criminal defense lawyer. They probably need both.
Right. Civil offense, where they just get a ticket, handed a ticket or a fine set up where it's not a detention or arrest, then the phone calls aren't appropriate.
No, because you're free to go. They say, stay here, sit in your car. I'm gonna give you a ticket, and you stay there. If you run away, then they can arrest you for trying to escape. But if you just sit there and wait and get the ticket, or they send it to you in the mail or whatever, that's fine. But then you call the immigration lawyer, the criminal defense lawyer, and say, what am I in, and what are the options, and how do we make this go away?
If you're protesting, for example, you go out on the Interstate 94 or 494 and stop traffic, then you should expect that you might get arrested. You might get arrested, and so
it's not the protesting; it's the obstructing traffic or violating, other laws. So you have to be careful. And just 800 people were doing it right with me. It was okay, right? No,
not for a non-citizen.
No, exactly. Yeah, and be careful because you're taking, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you're taking a different risk because you're taking an extra level of immigration risk that U.S. citizens are not taking. And so don't be intimidated to just follow along with the group, because you have to take care of yourself. Your friends aren't going to pay for your immigration lawyer or criminal defense. You have to deal with that. Let's see. I have some other questions here. Can we expect changes for visas or renewals in third countries? Probably. I think that would be one of the first that happened after 9/11. That happened with the Iranian students. It happens now with people in the Middle East. There's certain nationalities that have a harder time in their home countries. They have a harder time when they show up even in London or something. So you've got somebody who's an Iranian citizen or Syrian or Iraqi citizen. Even if you formerly were a translator for the US military for 10 years and risked your life, and you go to apply for a visa because now you're a student in London and you want to apply for a tourist or a student visa to come to the United States because you got a Fulbright or something, you're going to be facing a different level of scrutiny. I'm not sure, there is no legal definition of extreme vetting, but that's a phrase that Trump has liked to use a lot, which means there's going to be extra strict. And that kind of came in after 9/11. I'd say, yeah, we didn't change the rules, but the word came down from the White House as a national security. Be really, really careful. You don't want to be the government official that gives the bad person permission to come in. Bruce, you want to add to that?
You're more likely to get a security check if you're not in your home country.
Yeah.
The evidence has been that there's a higher concern, and with less knowledge of the backgrounds for these applicants, so that they are doing security checks. We had one at the University of Minnesota last year they went to Canada, third country visa application that took over 3 weeks to get a security check.
Yeah, I would say my practice experience, and Gene wants to add something here in a minute, is that the risk of a consular delay or denial is like a weather report. I think of us, we're like pilots to try to help the client get through the process and get them safely to their destination. And the pilot of your Delta airline flight or whatever says, you know what? I know I work for the airline, they want me to leave on time, but I'm not leaving on time because the weather report is not safe enough or this equipment isn't safe enough. I'm not going to put my crew or passengers in danger. That's my job one. You can fire me if you want, but I'm not taking this plane off. And so we try to counsel people, and the weather, immigration weather, changes from day to day, post to post. So one day, sending somebody to Cyprus might be a good idea, but then a week later it's not because they change the personnel or the attitude or something. Gene, you like to add to that?
Yeah, there's a difference between visa and status. So for instance, an F1 student or a J1 exchange visitor whose visa expires, that doesn't mean they have to leave the country. If they get a new I-20 form, a new DS 2019 form that helps to extend their status in the U.S., there's nothing that compels them to leave the country. You only need a current visa stamp in your passport when you're requesting entry into the country. So for many of you, maybe it's a good time, this year, maybe this year I won't travel home for the holidays. It's something that you have to weigh and balance for yourself, whether it's worth it. Now, the changeover won't happen until January. But in times of additional risk, if family members can come here to visit you instead of you leaving the country and having to apply for a visa because your current visa is expired and then come back in, maybe you want to minimize risk at this point by avoiding travel.
There's a follow-up question to that, and Bruce kind of addressed it, but would it be more cautious to remind students to continue to apply for newer renewals in their home country rather than third countries? In many, many cases, that is your best option if you're going to go to a consulate at all. In other cases, say, if you don't want to take any risk, just stay here. Don't leave. Your status is okay. You don't need to have a visa renewal, and you're taking the risk that you'll get delayed or not get back in at all because something could happen. All it takes is one crazy person who's an F or a J student that does something crazy in the United States, and the reflexive reaction of U.S. government employees on the whole planet, not even order, it will just happen. They want to be extra careful, and everything will get delayed because of administrative processing and so forth. So if you don't want to run that risk, decide if the trip is important enough and so forth. Yes, question?
We want to clarify visa revocation for someone who maybe have been arrested for DWI or so. Even though the person is in the U.S.
Yeah.
And their visa has been revoked.
Yeah, this is a new thing that just happened in the last couple of years. It's called prudential revocation, where the consular officer at the U.S. consulate, say in London in the U.K., they get notice from the sharing of information that's escalating every day with zillions of electrons going back and forth. So local arrests are getting reported to consular people into databases and stuff. And so somebody was arrested, not even convicted. They were just arrested, and it was a mistake. But they were arrested, and it goes into the database. the arrest can trigger an automatic or a prudential revocation, not automatic, a prudential revocation in the discretion of the consular officer that issued the visa 2 years ago, and they can enter into the database, this is revoked. They don't necessarily send you an email or a letter and tell you this has happened. The way you find out about it is when you leave the United States and you make a day trip up to Canada and try to come back, and then when the CBP person at the border decides whether to let you in or not, said, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, there appears to be a problem here. Your visa has been revoked. He said, what do you mean my visa has been revoked? He said, nobody ever told me that. I said, well, no, right here. It says it was revoked 2 months ago because you were arrested for a DUI. So yeah, but it was canceled. You know, I paid a fine for speeding, and they canceled everything else. And there was no DUI, anything at all that happened. I said, well, I'm sorry, it's revoked, and I work for the border inspection folks, and I don't have authority to issue visas. I don't think you meet the criteria for humanitarian parole or an exception or a waiver of a visa. So what you need to do is go back to the consular post that canceled it. And so you don't drive back from Thunder Bay. You go to Thunder Bay, you buy an airplane ticket to Toronto and a ticket from Toronto and go to London and apply for a new visa, and they then decide whether to give you one or not. Bruce, did you want to add to that?
Well, the thinking on that is that DUI involves possible alcoholism or addiction. It's under 212A1 medical evaluation. So if you go back to your home country, they may require a complete medical addiction evaluation.
That's right. Different consular posts have discretion. In some places, it's one and done. You get one arrest, no conviction within the last 5 years, and you're in Mexico City. There's a very good probability that if you go, back to celebrate New Year's, you won't be coming back for a long time, because the doctors that are the government-approved doctors that do these medical screenings say one is enough. And so to prove to us that you don't have this problem, come back in a few years and show us that you didn't have any recurrence of those issues. Other places, like Europe and stuff, like the anecdotal reports are, yeah, 1, you're probably okay. 2, just about anywhere on the planet within 5 years of applying for your visa or entry to the United States, that's probably going to get you a ticket to not come in, and you'd have to get a special waiver if you can, which can be difficult to do and take a long time. So that would be an example where if the person's in the United States, that person would be at high travel risk. And they'd say, you know what, I think you'd be taking a big chance. And if we've seen some tragic cases over the years, people that had to come back and defend their PhD dissertation, and they go back home and something happens, and they can't get back, and they can't set up the Skype connection to do that because the rules, you have to defend it in person and answer the questions, and their life is really messed up, because if I don't get my PhD, even if I never live in the United States, I can't get a job in my country or anyplace else. So, Jean, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, some people who've had, say, a DUI arrest have been getting a notice from the U.S. consulate in their home country that says, your visa has been revoked. You should report to our consular post as soon as possible, which means leave the U.S., come and see us so that we can, remove the visa stamp, or not remove it, but alter the visa stamp in your passport. At that point, if that happens to you, you should see an immigration attorney and talk about it. But again, there's a difference between visa and status. Just because, even if they have revoked your visa, doesn't mean that you're not allowed to lawfully remain in the U.S. If you're an F1 student and your visa has been revoked, well, if you're here and you have a current I-20 form, you can lawfully remain in the U.S. And in some cases, we're advising people to ignore that notice not ignore it, but don't feel tricked into what they want you to do, which is, oh my goodness, and leave the country, and then you're stuck outside. So it's kind of a threatening tactic that doesn't carry a whole lot of weight unless you let them do that to you.
Thank you, Jean. Could you pass the microphone up to, keep going, you're on the right, now, right there. Yes. Do you want to, I kind of cut you off when you were asking your question. Did that get addressed, or did you want to add to that?
No, I was just saying, I'm sorry I cut you off. I was just saying that I think all of us are in pain and hurting, and our students are scared, and
sure.
we're wanting to know how to support them.
Yep. Good. Okay. The next question is, I've taken a lot of the advanced questions. Let's take some from the floor because I see some people have had to leave. So I'll just start at the front and work back, okay?
So, could you bring a Gene,
Microphone right.
mind,
Right here.
logistics helper and bring the microphone around?
Okay, great. Thanks.
So what's the quickest and easiest path to citizenship for F1 international student?
Okay, there is no quick, easy way to citizenship, probably for anybody, even if you're a Swedish billionaire or something. There are intermediate steps. So the starting point for any kind of an immigration strategy is make sure you follow all the rules for the category that you're in. So if you're an F1, that means you need to be enrolled, a full-time student. You only work on campus or with OPT and so forth. And then most people that go from F1 and eventually wind up with citizenship go through 2 intermediate steps, at least, maybe 3 is more typical. They would, after they complete their studies, they qualify for OPT or STEM OPT after they graduate with their bachelor's or master's or PhD or whatever, and then they work for a US employer in something related to what they studied. And during that time, that employer attempts to sponsor them for usually an H-1 temporary professional work visa. There's a problem with the lottery program right now because for private employers, this doesn't apply to universities. If you get a job at doing anything, you could be a computer programmer for a university and you're exempt from this quota. There are only 85,000 H-1s, newly approved H-1s allowed per year. The last 2 or 3 years, there have been over 200,000 applications that have been filed. And they all get filed in the first week of April. And it takes 2 or 3 months to gather all the documents and go through the collateral documents you have to get from the Department of Labor to even file it. So we start working on these things, reminding people now, and we start working on them in earnest, immigration lawyers that do this type of work in January, and have everything ready to file. We take all these things down to FedEx on March 31st, and then for delivery on April 1st, or the first business day. There's a 1 out of 3 chance, even with a PhD or a master's degree, you'll get selected. So it's very important that you try early and often because statistically, you might have to try 2 or 3 times with the current H-1 quota system. To get that fixed, it's not the president, you have to go back to Congress. And there was a time when there were no restrictions. The first about 10 years of my law practice, there were no limits on how many H-1s could be approved. You could have 1 million H-1s. But then they put in a quota. And they picked what they thought was a really high number. And we never reached this number. I think it was like 80 or 90,000. Well, they'll never get that. Well, within a few years, in the 90s, the economy picked up and there were more international students with STEM degrees and other things that employers in the U.S. really needed and wanted. And so they used the whole quota. Well, then Congress increased the quota. If things were prosperous and there weren't people, saying deport everybody and build walls and all that stuff, that wasn't the way things were in the 90s. And so they increased it. Eventually got up to a couple 100,000. And then the anti-immigration stuff started to come in from both, and it's not just Republicans or Democrats, both parties have people that are against and for every possible kind of immigration thing. I've seen it over the last 40 years. That's part of this split personality thing, which makes it both interesting and frustrating to try to work with. But assuming you get an H-1, let's assume success. You get an H-1 approval. That's good for initially up to 3 years. It's renewable for an additional 3 years. It can sometimes be renewed beyond that if the employer is taking steps to try to get you a green card. Then, and to get an H-1, the basic requirements are you have to have a 4-year or higher degree from a U.S. university or equivalent education or experience. The employer has to offer you a job that requires that education. The salary can't be below a government standard. It can't be a really low salary for that job. And the government has calculations of what they consider to be the market salary for Minneapolis-St. Paul area for a master's of science in electrical engineering or an economics degree or whatever job. And so salary has to be at that level. It could be part-time or full-time. It can be a permanent or temporary position that you could be hired into as an H-1. Once you get that, then usually people that successfully go on to a green card and citizenship, the employer goes through a process of proving a shortage of U.S. workers. That's not required for the H-1, but they have to do government-regulated advertising to try to find if there are any willing, able, fully qualified U.S. workers who are already here, who have U.S. citizenship or green cards that would apply for the job. If somebody does apply for the job, the employer doesn't have to hire them, but you will not get a green card out of that. They'll have to wait, and then if they want to, they can try again, try again, try again. If there's some kinds of jobs, if it's a job that pays $100,000 a year, requires a bachelor's degree in English, and no special skills or experience, there are going to be a lot of people applying for that. Garrison Keillor might even apply for that job. And so that's probably not going to work. On the other hand, if you're somebody with a PhD in neuroscience or biophysics, and you have to have 3 years of experience doing certain kinds of procedures, the chances are, we can run. We ask the employer, say, well, if you run ads for it, we spent $50,000 on advertising and recruitment. We haven't got a single person in the last 4 years. We desperately need people. We found one that graduated from the University of Minnesota. We really want to keep them. So that one is likely to be approved. The harder it is to find a U.S. worker, the more likely that is to be approved. So that process to go from getting the H-1 could happen. Say if somebody graduates this June, they get the employer to sponsor them in the H-1 lottery for next spring, in 2018. They win the lottery. The person's now an H-1 starting in that fall. They can start that labor certification, worker shortage, green card sponsorship process maybe in the fall. Let's say that goes as fast as possible, maybe within 6 to 12 months. Now we're a couple years past graduation. So you're 2 years out after you graduated with your bachelor's degree or whatever. And then the person's applying for the personal green card. But there's a quota there too, and if you're from India or China, you might wind up waiting a little longer there, but you'd be able to keep renewing your H-1. Once you get the green card, the final permanent resident status, then you have to wait for 5 years after that, stay in the United States, stay out of trouble, pay your income taxes, and then you can apply for citizenship. The conversion rate from green card to citizenship is way over 90% if people just follow the rules. It's a long answer, but it's a simple question to ask. It's like saying is every complicated question has a very simple answer, and it's wrong, or incomplete, or misleading. There's a lot of stuff in immigration that's like that. So that's why I'm reluctant to have across-the-board rules. Everything is specific to the facts and custom adapted. Just like a doctor says, everybody, I'm a specialist in tonsillectomies. You come to me, you're going to get a tonsillectomy, regardless of your symptoms or the side effects. That's just what I do. So, yes, more questions working back.
I just had a question about traveling in the United States.
Inside the United States.
Right. So, I work with high school students who are F1 students who are sometimes traveling by themselves over breaks and things like that. And they don't often carry with them their I-20. They'll just carry their passport with them.
They should carry a photocopy of their I-20.
So do you see that more with the things that are happening right now? Do you think that they're going to be asked to show that more often?
I think that's a very realistic expectation. There are more Sheriff Joe Arpaio's, although he's no longer a sheriff in Arizona. He supposedly was on a short list for a federal government position in immigration, maybe the new ICE director. That would be pretty strange. But here's the practical tip. The advice I would say, there are special, the United States has borders. We have a land border with Canada, we've got a land border with Mexico, and then we have seaports and airports. But and most people think the border is actually that that sort of magical red line in the sand that doesn't really exist anywhere, but it's divides where Canada starts and the U.S. ends. But in the United States, there's also a special rule that allows U.S. government officials to challenge people to present their immigration documents is it within 50 miles of the border? Is that the rule? Yeah. So basically, if you're in San Diego, you can get stopped. So if somebody has something that they're worried about or they just don't want to have to deal with that, just never go within 50 miles of the coast. Just like I said, it's a big box. So you've got the United States, the outline of the U.S. map, and then you draw another perimeter that's like 75 miles from the nearest sea coast or the nearest land border and stay in the interior, what some people call flyover country.
I was on a train from Minneapolis to Glacier Park, Montana, and immigration inspection officers came on board the train. Why? Because we were so close to the North Dakota-Canada border.
Yeah, that train, that main line, and US 2, if you're driving your car out to Glacier Park, I've seen the Border Patrol out there, and we had a few years ago, it was a local university, college, I shall remain nameless, but there was a professor on that train, and he didn't have his I-20 or his documents with him. And he was on a cross-country trip on the Empire Builder, which is a wonderful train ride in the United States, if you ever have a chance to take it. And they pulled him off in, let's see, I can't remember which of the stops up in Canada, one of the, or in Canada, in Montana, in ICE, it was before ICE existed, so it was pre-2001, and they went down and asked people for identification and so forth, and they took him off the train because he didn't have it with him, and then he called the international office, and he was an H1 actually, but he didn't have his H1 documents with him or his passport, and they detained him, they put him in the jail, and the guy who took him off the train said, well, you could get some documents, and so he eventually got in touch. It was like on a Friday night or something. This stuff always happens on Friday nights. The university faxed the documents to them, and the guy looked at it and said, well, I'm not sure, but this looks pretty good, okay to me, so can I go? No. I only have authority to lock people up. I don't have authority to let them out. You'll have to wait until Monday when the supervisor comes in. That's a true story. Maybe you even know about that. But so there could be an issue. So you want to lower your risk maximum. Stay. Don't go to Puerto Rico, even though that's part of a U.S. territory. They do extra immigration screening between Puerto Rico and the United States, right?
Yeah, there's no basic screening if you go directly back and forth.
Yeah. Well, there is. I've been to San Juan a few times, and there's a guy with an immigration.
Yeah, right. They will.
And they just pick people out walking in. I said, how do you know the difference? He said, I can tell.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
like ICE agents. You have to remember ICE agents to check anything.
Exactly. That's right. Yes.
I work with international students, and many of them are asking now, those who are graduating, will their parents have problems coming into the country for their graduation?
Maybe. It depends on where their parents are from and how what their personal immigration filing history is and so forth. And there's also the possible risk of mistaken identity. I'd say anybody that's coming from a country that has a history, it's basically any place in the Middle East between anywhere in North Africa or the Horn of Africa or in there, even if their parents are completely law-abiding, never had a problem, they never applied for a visa before either.
They should apply early.
Start early. I would like 6 months early is not too soon, and they should be very careful that they accurately answer the questions and provide documentation. They have a round-trip ticket, they own real estate, they have strong ties to their home country, and they're just going for graduation and a visit to Disneyland, and they're coming back, and with a round-trip ticket, prepaid. They still may have a problem. If somebody happens to be, from Syria or Kuwait, whatever, it could be an issue. So, I mean, again, yes.
I had two questions. One about changing statuses. For example, a student comes here for high school, wants to become an F1, or a visitor coming in and wanting to change their status to an F1. How will that be affected? And also, can you speak a little bit more about the undocumented?
Let's just we'll come back to the undocumented in a minute. So the hypothetical is a person who's in the United States legally now as a visitor. And there are two kinds of visitors. There are visitors that come in that are the B1, B2 category, who will actually have a visa. And then there are people that come in with no visa, which is most of the people from the developed countries of the world, Europe and Japan and so forth. And they come in under something called a visa waiver program, where they don't have to go to the consulate. They still have to answer questions, but it's done electronically, and if everything goes okay, they just get on the airplane and they don't get a visa before they come. They get permitted to come in or not when the plane lands, and somebody like what Bruce's job used to be, where he would interview the people that got off the plane, "Can I see your documents, please?" And the person has a British passport, say, and there are no visas, there's no evidence he ever applied for a visa. They check the computer databases, and the guy shows up nowhere. There's no record of the person's existence. And then they just ask, well, how long do you plan to stay here? And they said, well, I plan to stay here about 3 months. And they said, well, how much money do you have with you? And he said, I got $200. How do you plan to support yourself? Well, I don't know, I'll figure something out. That person might not get in, even though because under the visa waiver program, because they have to show that they're not likely to be a public charge, they have sufficient resources to support themselves. On the other hand, a person that came in and passed that business and they're here as a B1 or B2, they may be eligible like anybody in a temporary alphabet soup category, with one exception for certain people who have subject to 2-year home country residence requirement, to switch categories from F or from B to F or from F to H. But that's a technical process, and in general, if you meet all the requirements for the status you're in and for the one you're trying to switch into, and there's no quota problem, that usually gets approved. Normal processing times, though, measured in months. 3-4 months is not an unusual time from the time you send your few $100s and all the documents in before they say yes, no, or we want more information. But specifically but the visa waiver people can't do that. They have to leave and go and apply for an F visa outside the U.S. For a B that's here as a visitor, they say they came for somebody's birthday or a wedding or something, and they say, I've never been in America before, but it's a pretty nice country, and I discovered you have universities here, or high schools, and I'd really like to go to one of these schools. And they check and they visit the McAllister admissions office, and they say, yeah, well, you have to go talk to our international student guy, Aaron. Oh, he's a nice guy, and yeah, well, it just happens to be that they're taking applications at that time. Also, I'm a world-class soccer player, and you've got a pretty good soccer team. I'd like to do that. Yeah, they have a good soccer coach talk to you too. So, but if that happens like 2 or 3 months after the person came and they had no idea and no advanced plan whatsoever to do that, that's probably okay to apply for a change of status. On the other hand, if they've been sending emails and they submitted some applications and they're, then it'll look like they have what's called premeditated intent. So you said you were just coming for a visit for a wedding in Disneyland, but you had a secret plan and you didn't tell us about it, and you should have, because so that gets fuzzy. There's some rules of thumb. They say if you apply to switch within 30 days after you arrive in the country, they presume that you had a secret plan, and that therefore you lied about it. That's not an unwinnable case, but that's higher risk. That's grades of risk. If it's 30 to 60 days, well, it's not going to be for sure that we're going to probably deny it because of that presumption. We're going to look more closely. You get past 60 or 90 days, probably, unless there's some other evidence that causes the adjudicator to think twice about it, those probably get approved if everything else is okay. Anything you want to add to that, Bruce?
We haven't heard anything that would suggest that those rules are going to change because of the Trump administration.
No, that's part of the business as usual.
Yeah, those rules aren't likely to change quickly.
Yeah.
Very unlikely. The one thing about a change of status as opposed to getting a visa is that the adjudicators in the service centers are not State Department officers.
That's true.
They're not looking for all the issues that the visa officers look
They don't
for.
care as much about 214B in my experience.
Right. And so
But we still give them evidence about it anyway.
Yeah. So a change of status is much more likely inside the United States.
Especially if you're coming from a less developed country where the rejection rate for B's and F's might be over 50% from, say, West Africa or somewhere in East Asia. I think then, yeah, it's probably better to try that first. That's, you always have the fallback. If they turn you down and you don't succeed in turning the no into a yes, you always have the option of getting on a plane and going back to your home country and apply for a visa. And the fact that they turned down your attempt to change status inside the United States, if everything was truthful, and they just said, well, we just don't feel confident enough to do this, you probably have about the same chance of getting approved as if you hadn't tried. So I would say usually give that a try. Okay, now I got 2 microphones, so other questions?
So I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
So I'm from Guatemala, and my parents have a tourist visa that was approved like 7 years ago, and they come to the U.S. like to visit before. Do you foresee any problems with them visiting in graduation? That's my first question.
Visiting for graduation. So this is, you're anticipating like May of this year. My son graduated.
Exactly, yes, 2017.
Okay. And have they been, how many times in their lives have each of them been in the United States?
Twice.
And were there any problems with them getting a visa or getting in?
No, they got the visa for 10 years, and they got in, got out with no problems.
Okay. I think it's possible that you just as you get closer to that time, you might want to see if they've changed the attitudes or the screening and stuff. Guatemala is not, it's got a lot of issues in terms of the economy and the local politics, but individuals that were able to get a B visa after an in-person interview are usually considered by the U.S. government to be lower risk, not guaranteed. It's not, visas are not for life. They can be revoked at the discretion of the immigration service or the consulate for all kinds of reasons, and they don't always have to make them public. But I do not see that, if you ask me that question without the election result or any time in the last 20 years, would I say that's a high risk thing? No, but it's not a zero risk thing. And as Gene pointed out, if something goes off the rails or it gets lost in somebody's file cabinet or they mistakenly have one of your parents has the same name and birth date as somebody who's on a bad person list, and that happens a lot now. over 90% of the people that get flagged by the immigration screening systems turn out to be cleared, but sometimes it takes them months to clear it up and say, oh, you're not that person. And so you don't want to have them, again, if they've already got the visas, then they probably should be fine. If the visas don't expire before they come, then they should apply months in advance to renew it. Is that?
Okay, so you think they should apply to renew it now?
When does it expire?
It expires, I think, by the end of, in 2018, I think.
I think they'd be okay for that trip.
Okay, and also, so I'm a math major, and
good for you.
But I got a job as a software engineer, so my focus on my math background is kind of like on applied math and programming and stuff like that. Do you foresee any problems with like an immigration officer questioning whether my major is like related to
Are
my
you
job?
currently in OPT or?
Yeah, so they will put me into the lottery next April.
Okay.
But at the same time, but if I don't get it, I'll probably try to work with OPT. But I'm a math major, and I'm just wondering if do you foresee any kind of like?
They're stricter than they used to be. But going back in the dinosaur ages when Bruce and I got started in this, the government didn't used to care too much. If you had a bachelor's degree and you got OPT from the school, people were using those if you got a business degree, especially, well, I'm working at Starbucks, it's a business. What do you do there? I'm a janitor, but it's a business, and so I'm using my business. They didn't seem to care much. Now, separate from Donald Trump, separate from 9/11, I'd say over the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a progressive tightening, and they want to see a tighter fit. And so what's happened now, like the STEM OPT degrees, where they have these things called SIP codes, where on the I-20, the school has to identify exactly, it's just like a Dewey Decimal System kind of thing, right down with like a 6-digit number and with some decimal places after it. And if you're on that list because it's a mathematics or applied math or something like that, then and then you want to see your job matches, especially now with the STEM OPT rules, they want a really close match. So a person who's a mathematics person who's got a job as a software engineer, and the other people that work there, some have software engineering degrees, some of them have math degrees, some of them have English degrees, but they have 15 years of experience and they know how to do it. That's a little trickier, but it's not impossible. I wouldn't worry too much about it at the OPT stage. If it's good enough for the employer and it meets the school's expectations, especially if you get into the STEM OPT, if it's a good fit there. When you get to the H1 stage, the H1 lawyer and the employer should normally, I would say, we ask for transcripts and then kind of run the transcripts, and so many people have a minor. We look at their individual courses that they took and said, this person has the equivalent of such and such, and just as a precaution to try to make that a little more secure. But there might be an issue there that the H1 lawyer and the employer will want to pay a little extra attention to. But I think it's probably going to be approvable from what you've described.
Do you think I should freak out and try to do the most I can?
I don't think you should freak out, period. I think what you should do if you get nervous is just breathe and turn off the television for a while.
Okay.
Eventually, it will get better. But if for your career reasons, for your own career, see, I was thinking of getting a master's degree in software engineering eventually, and especially if you lose the lottery, hey, it's might be a good time. Maybe your employer will let you do it on a part-time basis or something. You can start that. Because if anything that's good for your career, we do a lot of employment-sponsored and credential-based immigration. That's probably more than any other category. And the basic advice I said, anything that's good for your career and your education level, if you think what you want to do over the next 10 or 20 years, anything that's good for that is probably also good for your immigration options. So you don't have to choose. What's good for your career, you get a raise, that's great. You get a promotion, that's great. You get more education, that's great, especially if it relates to what you're doing. It'll just improve the immigration chances. Yes?
Thank you for answering these questions. I'm also asking from a personal situation. So I'm graduating in December of this year.
Good.
I'm thinking about going back to my country, which is China,
Yeah.
and then come back before the grace periods of OPT ends. I already submitted my, I think the application for OPT.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm just wondering if you foresee any travel risks with me coming back.
Well, I've already mentioned travel risk. That applies. There's a little extra travel risk for people that have completed their education. They're no longer F1 enrolled full-time students. You're now in that in-between stage
where you're either, it's between the completion of your studies and before the OPT starts, or the OPT has started but you haven't started working yet. And historically, there have been reports of people having problems with that because the consul OPT is subject to 214B. You could wind up on a name checklist, and anybody that travels outside could be delayed in coming back. I don't think right now that somebody from China that hasn't had personal issues with difficulties in getting an F1 visa before is at significantly greater risk, but it is a higher risk that you won't be able to be in the United States to start that job on the day you want. If you go home for Chinese New Year's and then you come back and your visa is still valid, you've got all your OPT and I-20 documents, but you may have a problem when the plane lands at LAX. It's possible. And the way to reduce that risk to as close to zero as possible is just don't go. But I don't think it's a high risk, and there are a whole bunch of other questions that in the privacy of a consultation, I might ask to screen out some other things that don't apply to over 90% of people that we want to ask because we want to say these are risk factors and whatever. But I say, historically, prior to this year, lots of people do exactly that and they come back just fine. But if something happens and there are things beyond your control, not just political, a computer glitch, particularly there's so many people in certain parts of the world. China is the most populous country in the world, and there are a lot of people that have similar names that are, there are a lot of Wongs, and they try to check it with 4 or 5 different spellings, and what are the probabilities that there's a bunch of other folks with that same name and the same birthday, which is what the government uses to key off the computer and criminal and CIA and terrorist search things. So up your name pops, and now you'll be told, we're not going to let you in, or if you're applying for a visa, you're subject to administrative processing, which could last anywhere from days to months to longer. So I guess that's it. I don't want to scare people, but you're making a choice to take that little extra travel risk by doing it. And if it's not that important to you, or if you haven't seen your family for a year or two, if your family can afford it, have them come and visit you here. Then you're not exposed to any risk at all, as far as the immigration, denial or delay of reentry. Does that cover your question?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Somebody who, I think we're at the point where I should probably concentrate on people that haven't asked at least one question already. Yes.
Hi, I'm a student here. My question is, in late August this year, the USCIS proposed a rule that's called International Entrepreneur Visa. That basically says that if you own at least 15% of the startup company, gets US VC funding, and a couple other things to stay in the country. How likely do you think that this would be realized?
This is a pilot project that's been talked about endlessly, and there's more politicians, including President Obama and a bunch of other folks, that because they couldn't get anything through Congress and they wanted to do something that would help entrepreneurs, particularly from countries like India and China, that we don't have an E2 investor entrepreneur treaty with, so they can't use it for that kind of a visa. They cobbled together what could we do basically as sort of an executive action type thing, and they put up this thing. I don't know a single person in the country that's used it yet. And I've read the rules, and it's pretty fragile. It's got a lot of conditions on it, and things that are beyond your control. You have to raise a certain amount of capital from a certain kind of sources and things. It's kind of a mess. I'd say anybody who's seriously considering that should consider some other options too, and not just say, like you saw an advertisement for some kind of prescription drug on television and it was late at night. Oh, that sounded pretty good to me. I think I'll go ask my doctor to write me. He said, ask your doctor about it. So I asked my doctor, said, oh, that would be horrible for you. That could cause you to have a heart attack. I would never prescribe that. I'd get my license taken away. So I'm not a fan of that right now. You don't want to be the famous Chinese proverb, the nail that sticks up gets pounded down. You don't want to be the pioneer on one of the first ones to use that visa. I'd wait till it had a year or two of
other people using it and seeing what the problems are rather than volunteering to be on that mission. Sometimes the pioneers in the business and otherwise get the rewards, but sometimes the pioneers get the arrows. Do you follow?
Yes. So what do you think? Just very quick follow-up.
Sure.
So what do you think is the best pathway for foreign nationals to start a business here? So in terms of visa, what do you think is the ideal way?
Well, there are lots of pathways, but when we do this kind of an in-depth analysis of all the various options, the ones that often wind up on the short list of things that can be implemented within a few months for somebody who's a key employee, investor, entrepreneur, whatever, H1 is one of the options because you can be the owner of a business, a corporation that you own part of, and that business can sponsor you for an H1. That's one possibility. Another one is something called an L1, which is what the companies like Medtronic and smaller businesses that are starting up, that they have to be international. They have to have some operations outside the U.S., some operations inside the U.S. There has to be a legal connection between the two, that's a good option. That works for any country, but it does require the person that's being sponsored has to physically be outside of the United States and employed on a full-time basis outside the United States, anywhere on the planet, but not the U.S., as a key employee of that international enterprise. And then they can be transferred into the United States as an executive or manager or a key employee. Yes?
For 1 year.
Initially for 1 year, but eventually that can be extended to either 5 or 7 years.
1 year outside the U.S.
Say physically 1 year outside. So the simplest case is I want to start a business. I got some people with some capital, and I got a friend who's just graduated from MIT with an engineering degree. We got a software idea. So, okay, and is this going to be only prepared and sold? No, this has an international market. In fact, part of the program is in Mandarin, and part of it's in English, and it's the customer-facing part. And that's it. And we're eventually going to sell it in Taiwan, and Singapore, and mainland China, and Europe, and so forth. Okay, are you going to have at some point have an office outside? And say, yeah, we can do that. Okay, well, set that up. And then go work for that company for a year. You can also set up the U.S. operation, but you can't work there individually until you qualify as an L1, which is the predicate. Just you can't get a bachelor's degree until you've taken the required courses and passed them, and then they give you the diploma. You can't be an L1 until you've qualified with 1 year of full-time experience as an executive, manager, or what's called an essential skill or a specialized knowledge employee. And then that company wants to transfer you into the United States to do a job in the U.S. The nice thing about this is if it's an executive or managerial thing, which can work for smaller businesses, is that it can be a faster, more reliable pathway to a green card than even $1 million investor capital. It can be faster, cheaper, more reliable. So there are a lot of options for entrepreneurs. The other thing we look at for people who are not Indian or Chinese, but are from the 50 or 60 countries that the U.S. has E2 treaty investor treaties with, then that is a better alternative in most cases than H or L to get started.
We have another question
Yes.
over here.
Hi. So I'm an international student from Sweden, and I'm planning to go home on Christmas. However, in the spring 2017, I'm going on an exchange program to Ghana.
Okay.
Should I foresee any challenges with coming back here in fall 2017?
Okay. Have you had any difficulties with U.S. immigration delays or at the airport in your entire life so far?
No.
Okay. And you're a citizen of only Sweden and no other country?
No, only of Sweden.
Only Sweden. Okay. I don't think you probably will have issues if you otherwise meet the requirements for that. So when you're coming back to be an F1 full-time student, right?
Yes.
So it's like sort of like a junior year abroad or a semester abroad type of thing.
Yeah, a semester abroad.
Semester abroad. Yeah, usually that works fine. Bruce, do you have any comments on that?
Most of the European countries, like European citizens, are likely to have as many issues as some in the Middle East and other areas that are receiving much more scrutiny when they're returning.
Yeah.
It's just a global setup. Customs and Border Protection, if you're coming back on a student visa, is much more likely to get some kind of alert or name check or security concern if you're coming, say, from Syria or
Yep.
someone.
Well, there's new questions on all the forms. If you are planning on an international trip and your travel route takes you through an interesting country in the Middle East, even if you're only there for a day, now you report that, and now you may be caught in some extra security screening.
Right.
Even though you're not a citizen, you never stayed there, it wasn't the plan, it's just, maybe if all you did was change planes at the airport, then it'll be minimal, but if you were there for longer than that, I think there's a risk that you're going to get delayed in extra screening. Yeah.
Maybe we can circle it up here if we want, and then we'll just
Okay.
we'll bring your question up, and we're going to just talk to them one-on-one, and then we can stop this.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you all for your attention.
We'll start with. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, you're probably a better person to ask one-on-one if you want.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you very much.
Do you see Congress reducing the number of visas for family purpose category?
We haven't closed this yet.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's private or not.